What's up, you guys? One of the questions that's often popped up whenever I'm helping people evaluate a FedEx business to buy is whether it would be a good idea to first become a driver, work for another contractor, and then later on buy routes themselves. And the answer to that is yes, it's going to be a valuable thing because having more knowledge and expertise and insight is always going to be a good thing. But that's a dangerous way to answer this question. Whenever I hear anyone ask me a question, I'm actually thinking about what's the underlying reason why they're coming up with that question. And whenever I answer that, it's a lot more valuable. And so the point is that there are actually 4 common reasons that make people think about the idea of becoming a driver first. And so the first reason is they think that once they're in the terminal, they can potentially network with other contractors, find out people that were thinking about selling or going to put the route on the market. And instead of the route hitting the market, going through a broker, getting a 10% commission added into the sales price and whatnot, they can actually buy that route directly. And so it's a strategy to be able to buy routes cheaper. Now, in reality, it doesn't really work out like that because a lot of times, a lot of things are negotiable. And so you're not really going to typically be able to get that much of a better deal with this particular strategy. Is it a possibility? Of course it is. But is it the best use of your time? Probably not so much. And so that's one reason. The second reason that they think is that they can find routes that would have never even made it to market. So this gives you a larger pool of routes to potentially choose from because a lot of transactions are private. It goes from one contractor to another within the terminal, never sees the light of day, never hits BizQuest or BizBuySell, never goes through a broker. And you can sort of step in between those two contractors and say, hey, I might pay a higher price than what this other contractor is willing to give you. Why don't you just sell to me? Now, not only might you be able to get a better deal, but it's also to be able to find a bigger selection to be able to sort of pick and choose which types of routes that you might want. So that's also a possibility. But again, it could take years before you find a contractor that is in that exact situation that is going to match up with what you want. So it's probably, again, not the best use of your time. And so the third common reason that people have for thinking this question is that they're thinking about trying to figure out whether they're going to like and enjoy owning and operating this business. And they feel like being a truck driver first will give them some insight. And I do agree with this. It would give them some insight, but I don't think it's necessarily the best way to go about it. And the reason why is a couple of different reasons. And so the first is that if you think about, let's say, buying McDonald's, it's almost like the equivalent of saying, well, let me be a cashier for a year and then I'll know whether I want to own a McDonald's. Well, owning McDonald's is quite a different story than actually being a cashier. Now, granted, you still want to know what that cashier does. You want to know how a register works. Same thing in the FedEx world. You want to understand how a scanner works. What are the different scanner codes? What do we do if a package gets lost versus stolen versus destroyed? Knowing all these things is important, but it's not going to make or break things in terms of whether you're going to enjoy this business because that's not really what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. You're hiring and firing people, dealing with E-Verify, changing your workers' comp rates, or whatever it may be that's a little bit on a higher level. That doesn't mean that not knowing what the truck drivers are doing is not important. It is important and it will give you insight, but that's not what really we're doing on a day-to-day basis when we own these things. Again, very valuable, but probably not the best thing because it's a little bit of a disconnect of what the owners are doing and what a driver is doing. But it's amazing to me when people come to me and they're like, oh, I don't want to do any work. I'm scared of blue collar workers. I'm scared of trucks. I want to buy a logistics company. Like if they would actually jump on a truck and see what drivers do, they probably realize that this business is not for them. And so this is especially the case when you're dealing with flat organizations, because in a FedEx business, you've pretty much got yourself, then a manager, and then the drivers. So it's not like there's a lot of insulation between you and the drivers, and knowing what those drivers do is important. Last and final thing is when people think that it is going to help them succeed in the business. Well, most of these deals, whenever you're buying them, have some amount of training period. Typically, it's 2 to 6 weeks, depends on the deal, depends on the seller. And whenever you're going through that training period, that is when you might be doing a ride along. In other words, riding along those routes, seeing what those guys are doing, learning the scanners, those sorts of things to be able to understand how routes work, how routes are structured throughout the day and delivered. Those things are all going to be there and they're going to be important, but it's probably something you're going to find out after you found a deal, negotiated a price, and starting to move forward, as opposed to doing it way before you've even found a particular deal. Because again, it's not necessarily going to help you a tremendous amount to be a driver for a year versus a driver for a week to learn how the business is actually run. And a lot of times people say, well, maybe I want that 1 week of training. Well, you could do that and start working for another contractor, but if you quit after a week, like that kind of sucks for you, sucks for the contractor, obviously, only sticking around for a week. So it's not really the best use of your time. So for the most part, most people that are buying these businesses do not start off as a driver and then later on buy the routes. Now, granted, it can happen, and yes, there is value to it, but is that the way majority of people start things and start to acquire these businesses? No. So hopefully this not only helps you with understanding whether you should start off as a truck driver or not, but also thinking about your questions and why you've got the questions, because whenever I hear those questions, I'm thinking about what are the underlying reasons that have caused that question, and I answer those parts directly. Not everybody else does that. And the more you can refine and be specific in your questions when you're talking to other people, that will be helpful for you being able to get a valuable answer. So anyway, if this helps, like, subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.